Good evening. Welcome to Be Informed. My name is Carl Buhariwala, and I founded Be Informed to help people make good decisions. Today, we're looking at electric vehicles, and we're joined by Tony Elkins of MoneyQuest Q, who'll be taking us through electric vehicles, the pros and cons in Australia. So today's session is being recorded and presented to you in Australia. So the context of the information provided to you today is in relation to the Australian market. And also from a disclaimer perspective, any information shared to you during today's session is of a general nature only. And if you do have any personal queries, you should reach out to your own professional representative in the finance sector to help you learn more about any implications that may be applicable to you. And before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. So today's session will run in a pretty straightforward manner. Tony will present to you for about 25 minutes. And then following that, we'll move into Q&A, and we'll start off with the questions that we've already received ahead of time by email. And then we will go through the questions that we received during today's session. If you do have any questions, please send them through in the chat function, and I will then relay them to Tony. This session is also being recorded as well, so if you do have to jump out, don't worry, you will be able to watch the full length of the presentation online on our YouTube channel. And Tony has also kindly prepared a one-page handout, which I'll share with registered participants by email following today's session, so you don't have to worry about taking too many notes. So with all that in mind, let's get straight into it. I'll hand over to Tony, and he will take us through today's seminar.
Thank you, Carl. Firstly, I'd like to thank you and Be Informed for having us on board today and being able to make this presentation. It is, Carl said, it is a general presentation. It's general in nature, and it is for the Australian market. Many of the things will carry internationally, and many of the things will not. So, the topic of the conversation today is electric vehicles, pros and cons in Australia, and can they save you money? So if we could pop through to the first slide, please. So just a bit of an overview of EVs and in Australia as well. The first EVs in the modern era, I shall call it, because there has been electric vehicles around since the 1800s. But in the modern era, the electric vehicles started really with Tesla, who released their Model S in June of 2012. Now, there has been some other odds and sods before that. There was the GM Volt. There was a few other experimental prototypes here and there, but fundamentally it was the Tesla that broke the mold in the modern era. I say that because unlike its predecessors, there was some Renault vehicles and the GM Volt, the Tesla was a proper full-size 5-seat sedan with a boot, and it looked not too strange. It was modern and sleek and overstyled in a lot of ways, but at the same time it was not the spaceship-like versions that the Chevy Volt was. And the key thing was at the same time, it was astonishingly fast. So it got a lot of attention by winning drag races and doing things into the marketplace where other vehicles were just parting around. It also had a reasonable range. The range was around, at the time, it was around 250 miles or 400 kilometres. Now, they've since gone out to another 50% again for the same Model S car. But that has become quite a thing. The prime driver at the time was environmental concerns or climate change. But the product acceptance was quite low, because we're talking 2012, we're talking $150,000 car. It had a high purchase price, it had limited range and limited accessibility to charging stations. And consumers like being leading edge, but they don't like being bleeding edge. And then, of course, there was the misinformation campaign about all of the issues. Fast forward to today, 12 years later, and there's 14.2 million EVs sold globally last year, and just under 10 million of those were full battery electric cars, BEVs as they call them. There are two fundamental types of electric car. There's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, a PHEV, and it usually has a very short range, but also has a petrol engine to get you wherever you're going when it runs out. So it might be a very good commuter car to go to here to the shops and back because it's got 40 or 50 kilometres of range. But 10 million units is not insubstantial, and that's growing every year and exponentially so. The PHEVs, we'll talk about them just for a second. They use a conventional petrol engine, and most people would have been in a vehicle like a Camry hybrid, where it uses an electric motor to start off and to slow down and to do small bits and pieces, and saves fuel that way. But it also has a petrol engine, but it has no ability to plug into a wall. The PHEVs have the ability to plug in and, in theory, never use their petrol engine in normal urban traffic. But when they get to that 50 or 40 or 70 kilometres down the road, the PHEV engine will kick in. So you could drive to Sydney and you'll make it out of Melbourne, and then your petrol engine will run the rest of the way. But our focus today is actually not going to be on them. It's going to be on the battery electric vehicles. And it's fair to say Australia was a late adopter. There is 180,000 EVs in use at the moment. And in fact, they're the largest selling car in Australia, car, not vehicle. The largest selling vehicle is a Ford Ranger, but the best selling car is actually Tesla Model Y. So there's some broad acceptance, even though we're late to the party. Next slide, please, Carl. Normally, it's good practice when you're talking about a subject to stay out of the negatives, but in the case of EVs, the negatives have been so great and so widely spread, and most of them easily disproven, that it's worth just touching base on. One of the things I hear all the time is, don't they catch fire? Well, there has been 6 cases of electrical vehicles catching fire in Australia. I can't tell you how many petrol vehicles or diesel vehicles have burnt to the ground, but plenty. There has been 6 electric vehicles, and all have been caused by the vehicle being damaged in an accident or damaged subsequently catching fire later, which is fractional compared to the number of cars on the road and a much lower rate than a normal petrol car. The batteries can't be recycled is another claim. Batteries can be recycled. There's businesses set up around the globe. They will take the lithium, which is highly valuable, and they can reuse somewhere between 95 to 98%. It's turned back into powder and made back into batteries, like 100% recyclable when they claim it back out. This is also the case, by the way, with solar panels and wind turbines, where there is lots of claims about you can't recycle them. There is industries now set up around recycling these because they are valuable. Of course, these industries didn't exist 10 years ago, so that claim was true then. But as the need for the recycling of these materials has arisen, so has the business to take care of it. One of the things that's worth noting that a lithium battery from a hybrid vehicle is, if it's in an accident or whatever, or a battery electric vehicle, has got a value of about $5,000. So it's fair to say there's not many going to landfill. Charging EVs from coal power is just as bad. That's actually not true either. If you were to charge your vehicle using coal power in Victoria here, which is brown coal, the CO2 emitted by running your car on brown coal, effectively, is 20% of what it would be if it was using petrol. So it's worth an 80% reduction if CO2 reduction is part of your makeup. It's important to not let the pursuit of perfect getting in the way of doing good, as is often argued. Another one is the producing of how that power is produced. Almost every argument which processes that talks about the processes involved in the coal and burning of the coal to make electricity to power your electric car ignores the fact that an enormous amount of power is used to pump oil from the ground through pipelines to refineries across oceans to distribution centres and into your cars. There's no full number on what is there, but what has been calculated just on the extraction and pumping would be the equivalent every month to use that. So not including shipping, not including refining, but the amount of power required to simply remove the oil from the ground and get it into the pipeline to the refinery could power 35 million electric vehicles for a month. So there is an enormous amount of resources for the status quo as well, is what I'm saying. It takes more resources to build an electric vehicle. That's actually true. It takes more power, about 50% more energy is used in the construction of an electric vehicle compared to a petrol vehicle. But at that point, there is no more energy into the production of the electric vehicle. Whereas after 3 years, that has been caught up, and electric vehicles from there forward will be actually more environmentally friendly and energy efficient. So overall, provided the car lasts 3 years, it is going to be a better thing. And most cars, as we would expect, last a lot longer than 3 years. Next slide, please, Fo. EVs can save you money. I came across a client a few years back in 2019 who are running hire car operators who run from Melbourne Airport to Melbourne City on a regular basis. They're moving aircrew from airlines to stay overnight before they flew out the next day. At the time, they were running Holden Caprice sedans, big sedan V8 luxury car. They replaced them with Tesla Model S and Model X SUVs. They were charged at their factory overnight in Tullamarine, and the owner estimated that the cost varied, but somewhere between $9 and $13 he thought to recharge the car every few days. That was compared to $140 in unleaded fuel. Additionally, those same EVs had a lower maintenance cost because there's less moving parts. There are no oils to change, there is no transmission to fail, the brake wear is minimalised because you recharge the car as you slow down by lifting off, it slows itself down. And at the end of the month, despite the fact the EV was a higher priced vehicle by a factor of nearly 80%, 80,000 versus 140, the dollars per month to the customer, the operator of these vehicles, was cheaper to run the EV, the higher lease payment and all the other costs reduce. So despite the initial higher purchase price, the EV was a better thing. Now that's obviously for someone who's doing a few kilometres, about 40, 50,000 Ks a year those cars do. And that leads us to our next item, where, of course, the initial take-up of EVs was in the wealthy eastern suburbs because they're expensive cars, a luxury item, something to brag about. 10 years later, here we are, And the highest take-up of EVs last month was actually in the outer suburbs, the commuter suburbs of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, where people are spending a lot of money on fuel going to work and back in the morning commutes. The highest take-up in Sydney was Rouse Hill in the northwest, and in Victoria it was Werribee in the southwest. So there's savings to be had, and of course there's been shift in the time frame as well with cost of vehicles and the cost of electricity, and people are now, with many homes having solar, saving some money. Just on that, the home solar systems, which are plentiful, they're not everywhere, they're not in every home, but they are plentiful across Australia. And if you're able to have an EV and charge your car on a Saturday afternoon when the sun is shining, then you've saved that $100 a week. We have another client who replaced their Corolla, Toyota Corolla, with a low-end Tesla, the lowest one they could buy, which was about $60,000. They've since got cheaper again. The client was spending around $100 a week in fuel. They're now back to $9 or $10 in electricity. So if you can charge your car off a whole solar system on your home, then that's fantastic. The other thing there, of course, is if you have a solar system, you can actually charge more than one car. Maybe you're doing one in the morning and one in the afternoon, or one on a Saturday, one on a Sunday. But the reality is that cost doesn't change, setup cost, and you can run it across multiple vehicles. As pointed out earlier, the EV costs are fractional. We have an owner who has done about 60,000 Ks over 4 years in a vehicle. And so far, the maintenance and repair on that car has been less than $100. Additionally, they've had about $770 in charging, or refueling if you like, when they're away on holidays because they have a solar system at home. And of course, they bought a set of tyres. But every car, regardless of type, will require tyres if you're going to drive them. That said, all cars should be maintained as per manufacturer. So if they want to see it on a regular basis, then you need to take it in and have it looked at. Thanks, Carl. The next thing we'd like to talk about is salary packaging. Now, not everyone has the ability to package their income to get around some FBTs and bits and pieces, but there is a lot of people that can. Pretty much everyone in large companies or public service has the ability to salary package a car, which basically means through a novated leasing system that you're in a tri-party agreement between you, financier, and your employer. Your employer is deducting funds from your salary and paying the car payments. And the car is typically a fully maintained car. So that includes petrol, insurance, registration, and maintenance. But if you get a car that is under the luxury car tax limit, which is 89,332 at the moment, it's going to about 90,500 after the 1st of July. And it's a plug-in electric hybrid or a battery electric vehicle, and there is a list on the government websites. You can avoid paying fringe benefits tax. Now, fringe benefits tax is 20% of the value of a vehicle. So if you've got a $50,000 vehicle, you'll pay FBT under the salary packaging rules of about $10,000 per annum. So depending on where your income is, there is a real benefit to a employee to have the car payments made before tax, even if they're paying FBT. But when you overlay that with an exemption from the fringe benefits tax, you get this uplift in the vehicle expenses. So you can purchase and have maintained a vehicle like a Model Y Tesla, which is in the very late 50s now. The prices went down last week. Not the fanciest version, they're about 80,000, but you can buy from 55. And depending on options and self-driving and bits and pieces, mid-60s is quite common. You can have that car for the same cost as a Mazda CX-5 entry level, which is a $40,000 car, 40,800 on the road. So there's significant, depending which way you want to do it, there is a cost saving or there is an upgrade in the vehicle you can have, and there is a government assistance towards moving the fleet away from polluting vehicles to less polluting vehicles. Thanks, Carl. I suppose the last part we'd like to talk about is what I call electrifying everything. And it won't happen today or tomorrow because a lot of things will be replaced as they require replacement. So more energy efficient home heating, more energy efficient TVs. They're now all LED rather than plasma. More efficient cooling systems. And of course, cars are all part of that as we go towards electrifying everything. So you'll see that over the 20-year period, long horizon, yes, that, vehicles and other equipment will change from being gas or petrol or whatever it is to just simply fully electric, powered fundamentally by renewable power. Excuse me, sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. The other thing is that an electric vehicle doesn't have the ability to have a transmission failure or that sort of thing. So it will wear down over time as part of its electrification. Its battery will wear down, but you will not be in that situation where an old car will just go kaput. We do expect to see you being able to charge your cars at home, at work, at shopping centres. And you'll see things that are transport items like metro buses and council trucks that are back to their depot at this point are absolutely able to be electric, and that'll save their operators money in the long term, and being able to sleep in as the garbage truck comes down the street without it rattling its head off will be nice for a lot of people. Interesting to see in the commercial applications, BHP is now conducting trials, they've announced it, and they're planning to move their fleet of haul trucks to electrical power. And by a haul truck, I mean that you see them in the news articles and all the things about mines. They're the giant, looks like a giant Tonka truck with the 10 and 12 foot tires that hold 200 tons of ore. They expect their entire fleet to be replaced by 2040. So over the next 15 or 16 years, they will move to a fully electric fleet of haul trucks for their mining. Of course, EVs can't, at this point anyhow, under the current environment and technical standings, can't do everything. And there'll be some items that will become what I call late adopters because the current systems are okay. And the important thing is that we are able to look for do what we can and worry about the others as we get to them. The first thing is grey nomads. EVs are quite sensitive to aerodynamics. They can carry heavy loads quite easily, as per the haul trucks, but they are terrible with wind resistance and that constant load. So you'll notice that when you see an EV, it's very aerodynamic. It has flat wheel covers to use less energy at speed. Adding a caravan to that mix destroys their range. That can come down to as little as 200 kilometres fully charged. And clearly, if you're in the outback, that's not going to work for you. So we don't expect to see grey nomads switching over to electric vehicles anytime soon because they'll be stuck halfway between towns. Heavy duty trucks in Australia, under the category of planes, trains and automobiles, and by that I mean semi-trailers, B-doubles, road trains, they actually are quite efficient. Their fuel burn per tonne is less than a plug-in hybrid. They're in that order. They're actually quite efficient because they use quite a lot of fuel, but they do move quite a lot of tonnes. And they will come across. The other thing is they're travelling typically, anywhere up to 800-900 kilometres a day. And so charge times, battery size, battery weights to carry that much charge are currently impractical, both from a mass and economic standpoint. Short of a breakthrough in one direction, that won't change in a hurry. Locomotives will also be slow to electrify, but they're also in that same category of relatively good for their size and weight. Most locomotives are actually what they call diesel electric, so they actually run a giant diesel engine to run a generator to charge a battery, and locomotives have electric motors in them because they have so much torque. Something has been mimicked by the Ram truck people in America, who are using a V6 engine in the same format, where the engine itself will not actually be connected to the wheels, only to a generator which charges a battery which operates electric motors, one in each wheel. Another area that's being worked upon and prototypes exist is aircraft, but there's no immediate plans for commercial application of aircraft because, well, the airline industry is rightly very conservative and they do not see, they're not in the place of taking risks with experimental things. That will come in time. The interesting thing about those last three categories, long haul trucks, trains and aircraft, is they're all industries that use massive amounts of fossil fuels currently. So, and they're all under very high cost pressures. So at some point, when the technology crosses that threshold, they will become very quick adopters to what is a low cost alternative, which is what is happening in the outer suburbs of Australia and around the world, where commuter cars are becoming the norm as electric or hybrid to run between work and home and work and home and around home. So they may not be your takeaway on holidays caravan type car, but they're certainly going to work for you around town. And there's plenty of examples of that being cheaper for people. Thank you, Carl. That's my short notes. If anyone's got any questions, then I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Tony. That was a very informative seminar. Tony's details are on screens. If you do have any specific queries or need his help, please do reach out directly to him. Just a reminder for those who have joined late or have had to leave, this session is being recorded. So you can review the entire session on our YouTube channel later tonight and going forward. And this is a reminder, Tony has prepared a one-page handout. So if you have been taking notes and have missed a few things, don't worry. We'll send the one-page document out to those that are registered by email. So we'll now move on to the Q&A, Tony, which we'll start off with the first question that we've got by email. Tony, the question is around, I think you flagged this as well, the sort of the falling costs of BEVs over the past few months and probably a year. What's the contributing factor, do you think, to that? And should people wait to see prices fall further, or are we just seeing just a cost equalization of these big types of vehicles?
I would suggest if you're in the market for a car, then not going to make a lot of difference. The cost of battery production, which is significant in an EV, is coming down by about 10% per annum. But so they've gone from being wildly expensive to just expensive. They're getting cheaper, and that brings the price of the vehicles down. At the same time, you could probably wait forever, and I'd caution people to think of it not so much like a traditional motor car, but more like a computer. Just because there's going to be a better computer next year doesn't mean you can't buy one today. And we know that they evolve, they get faster, cheaper, better. But at the same time, you need a car, and the cost savings versus a petrol car will always be there. So long as you can make it work in your environment, because that's the key thing for what I see, is that it's a benefit if it works for you. So if you're in an area without charging, or you're in an area where you might be in a rental apartment block where there is no on-street charging, so you're paying for charging. If you choose the plug-in hybrid option, you still have a petrol engine that needs servicing, so there is still cost there versus a full battery car.
Yeah.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, great, thank you. And just in relation to the comment that you made around charging stations and how they are growing, there are more and more sites getting, fitted with charging stations, that is the shopping centers and some workplaces, not all, of course. Do you see a trend in cars being equipped to be able to be charged more quickly?
Yeah, so there's multiple things happening. Whilst Tesla has been working on increasing range of cars, so from 400 to 500 to, in some cases, 650 kilometres range. The other side of it is the European manufacturers, the Volkswagen Group, Mercedes-Benz, have been working on faster charging, so very high speed charging, so that charge times may go down from, on a high speed charger, a Tesla high speed charger would be 45 minutes to fully charge a car. The Mercedes people are looking at 20 minutes. So you could park your car, go and have a coffee, come back, it's done. That requires a fair amount of technology. The other thing that's happening is the proliferation of charge points in rural and semi-rural areas is growing quite rapidly as well. And even one of the charge networks, one of the problems of having in a country town is that the power supply to the town needs upgrading to be able to supply high-speed power. There is a company now in Australia. They are distributing chargers that don't look like a petrol bowser. They look more like a refrigerator that have a battery within them that slowly charge. Then when you arrive with your car into the country town, you plug it in and it rapid charges from its battery to your car and then slowly refills by way of explanation. So that level of evolution is coming quite quickly. And it's not everywhere, but it's getting there fast. And an analogy was put to me recently about when Ford released the Model T in 1908. By the time it was replaced 20 years later with the Model A, there was no petrol stations at the start of that, and by the end of that 20-year period, they were everywhere. And you'll see that adoption comes through. And the proliferation of solar power is such that even today I saw there is one electricity company offering free charging on your bill if you charge your car in effectively daylight hours. So the traditional off-peak charging that we saw, have your electric hot water heating overnight when the power demand is down, is flipping to be, we'll let you charge it for free if you charge it during the day, because that's when the sun's out and we've got so much power that we don't know what to do with it. We'll give it to you. So if you're able to take advantage of that, if you're a plumber with an electric transit van, suddenly you're not buying diesel ever, and you're not paying for solar power either. It's quite phenomenal.
Sorry, go on.
No, that's all.
Yeah, cool. So you touched on solar, Tony, which is one of the next questions touches on this as well. You briefly mentioned the application of it. Do you think people could use, because currently when you plug in or you have to charge your vehicle, right, you're plugging into the wall or it's a three-phase outlet and you're sort of consuming electricity that way. But do you think people could equip their properties, and some already do, with, of course, solar panels, to then use that to solely charge their vehicles? Do you see a trend in that progressing?
Yeah, I know people who do it already. They literally charge their cars from the sun during the day. It becomes a problem if your car's at work during the day, which is common. Also a problem if you're a renter or in an apartment block. You may even own an apartment and it's not equipped to do that for you. So I know the building code has changed. Apartments now must be wired. They don't have to put a charger in, but they need to be wired to take charges. But that's no good if you bought an apartment that was built 20 years ago. So it's not perfect. It's not, but it's good.
Yeah, it's getting there. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think your analogy of the model, the Ford initial Model T to the A, and there wasn't any petrol stations, I think is quite intuitive, right? You think that over time, naturally, more and more charging stations will get put in. I think even at Chadstone, I was there a couple of weeks back, and I've noticed there's quite a proliferation of charging facilities.
Yeah. And the facilities used to be free to attract shoppers, and now they're charging you to use them because they see that as a revenue stream for them. You might go, that's okay. I'm going to be 3 hours at Chadstone at the movies or whatever. I will charge my car because I can.
That's right. And I think it's, you'll probably ordinarily pay for parking anyway, but you're contributing that cost towards the charging of your vehicle, right? So I guess there's a value add there to users of the car park. So we'll move on to the next question that we've got, Tony, around sort of uptake. You mentioned, certain areas, in the outer suburbs, sort of high on the list. Probably a contributing factor of that is their long distance driving, I guess, to their place of work or to the city. Now, of course, there's a general sort of, increase of uptake across all suburbs, I would say. Do you still see certain pockets more likely to be purchased, like regardless of wealth, etc.? Do you see location being a key driver? So do you think more and more?
I see. Yeah, the outer suburbs are very car dependent, right? So if you're in Elwood or Brunswick or Carnegie or even Box Hill, you've got access to trams and trains and regular stuff. And if you're going from there to the city, that is fantastic and it's a good public service. But if you're in Tarneet or Doreen or Lyndhurst, you've got a 20-minute drive to station to try and find a car park to get on a train if you're going to the city. But it's more common for a person in Pakenham to actually work in Dandenong or Dandenong South, or Tarneet to work in Laverton or something like that, than actually go to the city. And so the public transport to those areas is not very good, to be honest.
Mm.
And so they're the people that were spending that money on fuel, and maybe they've got two cars, maybe one's a big SUV with a diesel engine to tow a caravan, and one's an electric vehicle as a commuter car. And so that's a compromise that's being seen as relatively common, that you have the ability to a bit of both worlds. We're going away on holidays with the caravan, we take the big SUV. We're running to the shops, we take the electric car, because that just, it's a cost reduction.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the person's question was more, I think probably more a comment of
Yeah,
the general uptake.
but it is. You'll see it there, and it
Mm.
won't work for everyone, but it will work for a lot of people. My thoughts.
Yeah, and you're totally right as well. This just even the accessibility to some of the suburbs, some of the roads are few and far between, right? So you can be sitting in traffic for quite a while, which is not very economical if you have a fuel,
Mm.
petrol powered vehicle. So Tony, the next question that we've got is just around salary packaging, and you touched on this during your seminar. The person would just like a bit more sort of, I guess, clarity around that table that you shared. If I just go back to that slide
Mm-hmm.
over here, can you just sort of take us through, of course, it's all hypothetical, but
Yeah.
just sort of
So,
how
so,
did you come to that weekly cost figure, just for their understanding?
so that came from a vehicle that's travelling 15,000 kilometres a year, and the other thing was we used a salary packaging, an income of $100,000. So a high income, but not massive. And so that would be like a nurse with some overtime, a police officer. That's in that sort of grade for those that are overseas. So those people have the ability to have a novated lease as part of their employment, which gives them an advantage, and that the car is paid for out of pre-tax money. So instead of, if you use a round number, the car is going to cost you 15,000 a year. Instead of earning 100, you earn 85, but here's your car. And then your tax rate goes down and you have an advantage in that salary package. But typically that has been offset by the fringe benefits tax is literally calculated to make that marginal. However, the government some 4 or 5 years ago decided that they would exempt EVs below the luxury car tax threshold from that charge, and so therefore you've got a cost advantage. Salary packaging is a bit tricky because the benefit to a person on $50,000 is not as great as one on 150 because your tax rate's different. So therefore having a salary packaging item that reduces your taxation when you've got a low tax bill isn't as great a benefit as someone who's at the higher end who has got a large tax bill. So that's,
So
advice
Tony,
is
yeah, so
general.
Tony, yeah, general, of course, yeah. If you have any specific queries about what potential,
Yeah.
savings you could get, then of course definitely speak to Tony
We can quote
directly.
up every circumstance, but you literally have to do that. So because the car that you choose might be different to the car that I choose, your
Yeah.
salary will be different to my salary, and our annual kilometres will be different. So the
Mm.
factors that go into making that maintained lease, even as a petrol car, will be different.
So Tony, that 5 years you've got the term, that's the term of the lease, yeah.
Yeah, term of lease. Usually and there is ATO guidelines. The 5-year lease with usually a 28%, 30% residual is common.
And that
So
241 would be the amount that comes out of the
out of your
individual's
salary before, weekly cost
pre-tax,
of
is it? Yeah, okay.
pre-tax, yeah.
Yeah, right. Cool. All right. Well, so hopefully that helps. And I think, as you mentioned, in line with, I guess, inflation, that threshold is going to increase from 89 to about 90, you were saying. So,
Yeah, 90, almost 91, I believe.
mm. But I think the general view is that I guess, prices of those vehicles are coming down, probably because the components are, as you may saying, getting more cost effective to produce. Hopefully that
So
sort
you
of
just need to be a little bit careful. I know I played with a few of them. Ford have got their Mach-E, which is a small electric SUV, and it is there's three different variants, and only one of them is below the luxury tax barrier. Tesla's got three Model Ys. They're all below that line, but you can tip it over the line by choosing different trim and paint and self-driving options, which are $5,000 and $10,000, and suddenly you're over the line. So you just need to be careful. That 89,332, as it is today, is the invoice price of the car with all its accessories, and it does not include on road. So if your car became 93 on the road, but it was invoiced at 89,331, you'd be okay. But if you selected an option that made the car 91 plus on roads, you'd miss out.
So it's not even proportionate, Tony. You can't even claim a proportion of the.
No, it's a hard line.
Hard line, yeah.
It ignores the government charges, but so you could order a Tesla Performance, but if you wanted the self-drive, I would pay for it at first service separately.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah,
other cars can't do that, but there is. I think there's three manufacturers. There's BYD, MG, and I think it's Kia. All have a car under $40,000. Brand new electric vehicle under $40,000. So they're not flash, but they're not terrible, and they're back at the price of a normal hatchback. So they might have a 350 kilometre or 400 kilometre range, but now you're talking about a little MG that's going to do the job of a Corolla. It's going to punt around town as a second car. It's not everything has to be that flashy Tesla thing.
Yeah, and Tony, just moving on to our last question, businesses, right? If I'm running a business and want to get a fleet of vehicles, are there any benefits from the government, to your knowledge, that might be beneficial to me as a business owner?
There's
Aside
no,
from, of course,
no, there's not. There's no direct benefits other than the fringe benefits, and obviously running costs. If you've got a fleet of electric vans for your plumbing business, then obviously you've got lower cost.
Yeah, so there's no real government incentives to there's no real government incentives to migrate your fleet to the EV line. Of course, aside from personal, I guess, business savings you can reap through the running costs. Yeah,
I do know, and I've worked for employers that have put their staff in twin cab utes because they're FBT exempt, and it was cheaper to put everyone in a $60,000 twin cab than a $40,000 twin.
Yeah.
So that exists, and that's really just an individual thing for each business at this point. I see that I can just see in time it'll just come. There's been lots of objections, and they don't sound good, but neither does a diesel Hilux. An old V8 sounds fantastic. Typically they're not replacing those cars.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you, Tony, for that. That brings us to the end of Q&A. I'll just pass on to the next, just a reminder of Tony's details on screen. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to him directly. And as a reminder, thank you. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded. So following today's session, I'll make the link available online so you can look at it on our YouTube channel at your leisure. And of course, Tony has kindly prepared a one-page handout, which I'll share with registered participants by email. So you'll have that document handy, and you can then use it for yourself or share it with family and friends. That brings us to the end of today's formalities. Thank you for attending a session with Be Informed, and thank you, Tony, as well, for taking the time. He's a friend of Be Informed, previously has presented with us, so great to have him back. And that's probably about it. We have another session in June, which looks at sort of family law matters on separation and divorce. So that'll be, it's a highly sort of relevant topic at this point in time. So we've got Amanda who will be presenting on that in June. And till then, stay safe and see you in the future. Bye for now.